In the small, isolated town of Ravenswood, whispers of the haunted forest on the outskirts had persisted for generations. Few dared to venture into the dense, dark woods, and those who did often returned with wild stories or, worse, never returned at all. But for Anna, a young journalist with a thirst for uncovering the truth, the forest's secrets were too tempting to resist. Anna had heard the tales of the Forgotten Ones, a group of settlers who had vanished in the forest centuries ago. According to local legend, these settlers had been lured into the woods by an unseen force, never to be seen again. Determined to separate fact from fiction, Anna set out to investigate, armed with her camera, notebook, and a steadfast resolve. It was a crisp autumn morning when Anna entered the forest. The towering trees seemed to close in around her, their gnarled branches intertwining like skeletal fingers. As she ventured deeper, the sounds of the outside world faded away, replaced by an eerie silence that made her skin crawl. Hours passed, and Anna felt as though she had been walking in circles. The forest was disorienting, and the deeper she went, the more she felt as though she were being watched. She dismissed it as paranoia, focusing instead on the task at hand. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the forest floor, Anna stumbled upon something unusual. A small clearing, untouched by time, stood before her. In the center was a dilapidated cabin, its wooden walls covered in moss and ivy. Intrigued, Anna approached the cabin, her heart pounding with anticipation. Inside, the air was musty and thick with decay. Dust motes floated in the beams of fading sunlight that filtered through the cracks in the walls. Anna's eyes were drawn to a table in the center of the room, upon which lay an old, leather-bound journal. She picked it up, carefully opening the brittle pages. The journal belonged to a man named Samuel, one of the settlers who had vanished. His entries detailed the group's descent into madness as they were tormented by unseen forces. Samuel wrote of strange whispers in the night, shadows that moved on their own, and a growing sense of dread that consumed them all. Anna's hands trembled as she read the final entry, "We are not alone. They are here, watching, waiting. I fear it is too late for us. To whoever finds this journal, beware the darkness that lies within these woods." A sudden chill ran down Anna's spine, and she realized the cabin had grown unnaturally cold. The silence was broken by a faint whisper, barely audible but unmistakable. She turned, her breath catching in her throat as she saw them, shadowy figures standing in the doorway, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Panic surged through her, and she bolted from the cabin, the journal clutched tightly in her hand. The forest seemed to come alive around her, the trees closing in, their branches reaching out like claws. She could hear the whispers growing louder, more insistent, as the shadowy figures pursued her. Anna ran blindly through the forest, branches tearing at her clothes and skin. She didn't stop until she reached the edge of the woods, collapsing onto the ground, gasping for breath. When she finally looked back, the shadowy figures were gone, but the whispers lingered in her mind. Back in Ravenswood, Anna tried to tell her story, but few believed her. The journal was her only proof, but even it seemed to fade with time, the words becoming illegible as though the forest were trying to reclaim its secrets. As the days passed, Anna couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She started having nightmares, vivid and terrifying, where she was lost in the forest, the shadowy figures closing in on her. In her waking hours, she could still hear the whispers, faint but persistent, echoing in the back of her mind. Determined to understand what had happened, Anna began researching the history of Ravenswood and its cursed forest. She spent countless hours in the town's library, poring over old maps, records, and newspapers. She learned that the settlers had been a group of pioneers who had arrived in the area in the early 1700s, hoping to build a new life away from the crowded cities of the East Coast. According to the records, the settlers had established a small village near the forest's edge. For a time, everything seemed to be going well. But then, strange occurrences began to plague the village. Crops failed, livestock disappeared, and people reported seeing strange lights and hearing unsettling noises in the woods at night. Fear and paranoia grew, and one by one, the settlers began to vanish. Anna's research led her to an old, reclusive man named Elias, who lived on the outskirts of Ravenswood. The townspeople said Elias was a descendant of one of the original settlers and that he knew more about the forest's dark history than anyone else. Elias was reluctant to talk at first, but Anna's persistence paid off. Over cups of strong, bitter tea, Elias shared what he knew. He spoke of an ancient, malevolent presence in the forest, something older than the settlers, older than the trees themselves. He called it the Forest Guardian, a spirit that demanded sacrifices to appease its insatiable hunger. According to Elias, the settlers had unwittingly angered the Guardian by cutting down sacred trees and building their village too close to its domain. In retaliation, the Guardian had cursed them, luring them into the forest one by one and trapping their souls for eternity. Anna listened, a sense of dread settling over her. "Is there any way to break the curse?" she asked. Elias shook his head. "Many have tried, but none have succeeded. The Guardian's power is too strong. The best we can do is stay away and hope it leaves us be." But Anna couldn't leave it at that. She felt a responsibility to the settlers, to Samuel and the others whose souls were trapped in the forest. She decided to go back, to confront the Guardian and try to free the forgotten ones, no matter the cost. She returned to the forest, this time with a plan. She brought offerings, tokens of respect and apology, hoping to appease the Guardian. She also brought equipment to document her journey, determined to uncover the truth once and for all. As night fell, Anna found herself once again in the clearing with the old cabin. She laid out the offerings, a handmade wreath, a carved wooden figure, and a small vial of spring water, on a flat stone near the cabin. She spoke aloud, addressing the Guardian, asking for forgiveness and mercy. The forest seemed to hold its breath. The air grew cold, and the whispers started again, louder and more insistent. Anna felt a presence behind her and turned to see the shadowy figures emerging from the darkness, their glowing eyes fixed on her. Fear gripped her, but she stood her ground. "I come in peace," she said, her voice trembling. "I seek to free those you have trapped. Please, let them go." The figures stopped, their forms flickering like candle flames in the wind. One stepped forward, its eyes burning brighter than the rest. It raised a hand, and Anna felt a force like a gust of wind push her to the ground. Pain shot through her body, and for a moment, she thought she was going to die. But then, the force lifted, and she found herself standing once more. The figures had retreated, but their eyes still watched her from the shadows. Anna felt a sudden clarity. The Guardian was testing her, seeing if she was worthy. She took a deep breath and stepped forward, walking into the cabin. Inside, she felt a pulse of energy, like the beating of a giant heart. She opened the journal again, reading Samuel's words aloud. She spoke of the settlers' plight, their suffering, and their hope for freedom. The air grew thicker, the whispers louder, and the shadowy figures crowded around her. But Anna didn't falter. She continued reading, her voice steady and strong. As she finished the final entry, a blinding light filled the cabin, and she heard a deafening roar. When the light faded, the shadowy figures were gone. In their place stood the settlers, their faces peaceful and free of fear. Samuel stepped forward, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," he said, his voice echoing like a distant memory. "You have freed us." Anna felt tears streaming down her face. She watched as the settlers faded away, their souls finally at peace. The cabin seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, the oppressive energy lifting. Anna left the forest, her heart lighter than it had been in months. She had faced the darkness and won. The whispers were gone, replaced by a profound silence. The forest was just a forest now, its secrets finally laid to rest. Back in Ravenswood, Anna shared her story, and this time, people believed her. The town began to heal, the fear that had gripped it for generations finally loosening its hold. And Anna, though she never forgot the horrors she had faced, found a sense of peace. She had uncovered the truth, freed the forgotten ones, and in doing so, had forged her own path through the darkness.
Don't forget to subscribe.